9 reasons why the Bible condemns same-sex marriage and LGBT relationships. The debate surrounding same-sex marriage and LGBT relationships within Christianity is deeply rooted in biblical interpretation. While some argue for inclusivity, traditional biblical reading suggests that same-sex relationships contradict God's design. This essay outlines 9 key reasons why the Bible is often interpreted as condemning same-sex marriage and LGBT relationships. 1. The creation order, male and female complementarity. The foundational biblical view of marriage is established in Genesis 1 verse 27 and Genesis 2 verse 24, where God creates humanity as male and female and ordains marriage as a union between a man and a woman. This divine order is reinforced in Jesus' teachings in Matthew 19 verses 4 to 6, where he reaffirms the Genesis account, emphasizing the complementarity of male and female in marriage. Traditional interpretations argue that same-sex unions deviate from this creation design, which is meant to reflect God's purpose for humanity. 2. The prohibition in Leviticus. The Old Testament explicitly condemns same-sex relations in Leviticus 18 verse 22 and Leviticus 20 verse 13, where God declares that a man lying with another man as one would with a woman is an abomination. Some argue that these laws were ceremonial and no longer apply to Christians today. However, traditionalists maintain that these prohibitions reflect God's moral law, which is timeless and reinforced in the New Testament. 3. The judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19 verses 1 to 29, has long been cited as an example of divine judgment against homosexuality. The men of Sodom sought to engage in same-sex relations with Lot's visitors, and God destroyed the cities as a consequence. While some modern scholars argue that the primary sin was inhospitality and violence, Jude 1 verse 7 states that Sodom and Gomorrah were punished for engaging in sexual immorality and perversion. Many believe this includes same-sex behavior. 4. Paul's condemnation of homosexual acts. The Apostle Paul explicitly addresses same-sex behavior in Romans 1 verses 26 to 27, stating that both men and women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones, which he describes as a consequence of turning away from God. Paul further links such behavior to moral decay and rebellion against God. Traditional readings assert that this passage is a clear denunciation of all same-sex relationships. 5. Homosexuality listed among serious sins. Paul also includes homosexuality in lists of behaviors that separate individuals from God. In 1 Corinthians 6 verses 9 to 10, he states that the unrighteous, including those who engage in arsenokoitai, a Greek term often translated as homosexual acts, will not inherit the kingdom of God. Similarly, 1 Timothy 1 verses 9 to 10 lists arsenokoitai among sinful behaviors. While some scholars debate the exact meaning of the term, traditional interpretations see this as a blanket condemnation of homosexual acts. 6. Marriage as a symbol of Christ and the Church. Ephesians 5 verses 31 to 32 describes marriage as a reflection of Christ's relationship with the Church, where Christ is the bridegroom and the Church is the bride. This divine metaphor is rooted in male-female complementarity. Those who uphold a traditional biblical view argue that same-sex marriages cannot reflect this theological truth, as they do not align with the God-ordained symbolism of marriage. 7. The purpose of marriage, procreation and family structure. From the beginning, marriage has been tied to procreation, as seen in Genesis 1 verse 28, where God commands humanity to be fruitful and multiply. While not all heterosexual marriages produce children, the inherent potential for procreation is viewed as part of God's design. Since same-sex relationships cannot naturally fulfill this purpose, they are seen as contrary to the biblical vision for marriage and family. 8. Biblical consistency in defining marriage. Nowhere in the Bible is there an example of a same-sex relationship being affirmed as holy or God-ordained. In every instance where marriage is mentioned, it is portrayed as a union between a man and a woman. Jesus himself, in Matthew 19 verses 4 to 6, upholds the Genesis definition of marriage without suggesting any alternative forms. Many argue that this consistent biblical model reinforces the view that same-sex unions fall outside God's will. 9. The call to holiness and sexual purity. The Bible repeatedly calls believers to live in holiness and avoid sexual immorality. 1 Thessalonians 4 verses 3-5 urges Christians to abstain from sexual sin and live in sanctification. Since same-sex relationships are classified as immoral under traditional interpretations, they are viewed as incompatible with a life dedicated to biblical holiness. Conclusion: the traditional Christian stance on same-sex marriage and LGBT relationships is based on biblical texts that emphasize God's design for marriage, explicit prohibitions against same-sex behavior, and broader theological principles. While some scholars and denominations advocate for a more inclusive interpretation, the majority of historical Christian teachings hold that same-sex unions and LGBT relationships are incompatible with biblical doctrine. As the debate continues, it remains crucial for individuals to approach the topic with a commitment to scriptural integrity, theological study, and respectful dialogue.